PCA inspector, and she owns 5 dogs, 7 cats. Meanwhile, David says, Patrick, those whiter shade chords from Bach on the organ take you into a cathedral space, immediately calming and somehow reassuring as the mind opens for the story. But not your mind,
go
Patrick.
To church as well.
Then the ethereal voice, it transports you, but not you, Patrick Smelly.
No, not me at all. And proud of it.
And proud of it, gosh. Janet Wilson, Patrick Smelly, kia ora to you both. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei. The Parliament protesters won't clear off, but they are clearing businesses of customers. So is the capital's mayor right to engage with so-called occupation influencers? Hundreds of care packages are being delivered to isolating Otago uni students as Omicron spreads. The big ISO is forcing Auckland cafes and restaurants to close and Auckland ambulances to park up because of staff shortages. Have emergency COVID laws passed their use-by date? Yes, according to a prominent lawyer. Other Western countries sanction Russia, while New Zealand calls in their ambassador for a please explain. And a sky deck with a pool and cupcakes. We're inside Superwoof, a luxury hotel that's gone to the dogs.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Kia ora tātou, ko Ivy Ashton tēnei. The government is likely to announce a move to phase 3 of its Omicron response tomorrow. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins and Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield will make the announcement. A move to phase 3 will see further changes to contact tracing, which will mean only the highest risk contacts will need to isolate. Infected people will be encouraged to tell close contacts and isolate at home. Clinical care and welfare support will be targeted based on need. A record number of cases was reported today, 3,297. There have been huge queues at testing stations, and GPs have been warning they may not be able to cope with the number of cases in the community. The scale of the COVID outbreak in Otago is larger than previously reported, possibly because students from different parts of the country have been skewing the figures. The number of new COVID cases in Southland and Otago more than doubled today to 455. Ruth Hill reports.
Several student parties in Dunedin last week have been listed as locations of interest, and both Otago University and Otago Polytechnic have cases on campus. The Health Ministry says many people who tested positive in Southern District Health Board recently have home addresses elsewhere. Previously, they were included in other regions' case counts. However, the Ministry says an undercount in one area does not significantly impact public health decision-making. It expects the true number of community cases is higher than reported, and this has been factored into planning.
The Reserve Bank has raised its official cash rate by 0.25 percentage point to 1%, but says it seriously considered a bigger rise. The central bank says the increase is needed to combat strong inflation pressures getting out of control. Here's our business editor, Giles Beckford.
The RBNZ says it was a finely balanced decision whether to raise the cash rate by 0.25 or 0.5 percentage point to get inflation under control. For now, it looks set to be a series of smaller rises to above 2% this year and a high point closer to 3.5% by 2025. The bank says the economy is performing strongly, but house prices are expected to fall and there will be challenges from Omicron and a slower global economy. The immediate impact on retail lending rates is likely to be limited, given banks have already factored in a higher cash rate.
The Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has announced sanctions against Russia that include travel bans and financial measures. He says it's likely to be the first of several tranches of penalties against Moscow, which is pressing ahead with an invasion of Ukraine. Mr Morrison says Russia is behaving like thugs and bullies.
We will be standing up to Russia, along with all of our partners, like-mindeds, and all of those who believe that it is absolutely unacceptable that Russia could invade its neighbour.
The financial punishments bring Australia into line with the US and the UK, which earlier announced sanctions. Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand traditionally uses a multilateral approach, such as via the UN, but is able to use similar measures. RNZ reporters have seen one arrest in the last hour at the anti-mandate protest at Parliament. Otherwise, it's been a relatively calm day so far, but that hasn't stopped more action being taken behind the scenes. Our reporter Tom Kitchen is there.
It's not clear why the person was arrested, and police continue to patrol the protest area. They say moves to reduce the cordon will continue in the coming days as they try and return the city back to normal as quickly as possible. 2 schools near Parliament have now closed their doors for a few days, Wellington Girls and St Mary's College, because of fears for students' safety. The ETU and PSA unions say 90% of their members working at Parliament are concerned about the protest and want it to end.
Now to sport, and New Zealand's most successful Olympian, Dame Lisa Carrington, looms as the likely winner of the Supreme Award at tonight's Halberg Sports Awards in Auckland. This year's awards cover the sporting achievement of 2020 and 2021 due to the impact of COVID. As Felicity Reid reports, it's hard to see Carrington, a 5-time Olympic kayak champion, missing out.
The stiffest competition for the top gong may come from the Black Caps, who should edge out Olympic men's 8 rowing champions and America's Cup winner Team New Zealand in the teams category. In winning 3 gold medals in Tokyo last year, Carrington took her Olympic tally to 6 medals, 5 of them gold, making it difficult for the likes of motocross rider Courtney Duncan, golfer Lydia Ko, rower Emma Twigg and rugby 7 star Sarah Hirini to get close to her for the Sportswoman Award. The men's category looks much tighter, with Kane Williamson, rower Hamish Bond and 2020 IndyCar champ Scott Dixon among the contenders. Dame Sophie Pascoe is odds-on to win the para-athlete title again.
Football Ferns captain Ali Riley believes the agreement the US women's team has finally reached with governing body US Soccer on equal pay will help the women's game globally. New Zealand already has pay equity and parity for the senior national sides.
For every league that has momentum, recognition, more support, that helps players from everywhere in the world, because that means there are more opportunities for women who play soccer.
Meanwhile, Chelsea's beaten French side Lille 2-0 in the first leg of their Champions League last 16 tie. That's the news.
Violence inside the occupation.
It was a full-scale martial-style kick. It was just the most horrifying example of street violence I've ever seen.
The Jewish community calls out hate speech.
The reference Jew-cinder, that is a very ugly, racist, derogatory way of using the word as a slur.
But Winston says the protesters have a right to be heard.
Well, I'm struggling to see how the Prime Minister acted one way when it came to his Mātau. You accept one, you don't accept the other.
Covering the protest, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine apart from isolated showers, mainly afternoons or evenings, possibly heavy in Waikato and Bay of Plenty today. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy. Showers becoming widespread in Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay today, and in Gisborne tomorrow morning. Showers are clearing in Wairarapa later tomorrow. For Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumarunui and Taihape, also Nelson and Marlborough. Partly cloudy today with isolated showers in Nelson and Marlborough. Fine tomorrow. Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin, mostly cloudy with fine breaks in the afternoons. Drizzle is possible in North Otago and Dunedin tonight and tomorrow morning. For Bulla, mostly cloudy, a few showers, possibly heavy today. Westland and Fiordland, fine apart from isolated showers. Central Otago, Clutha and Southland, fine weather for you. For Rekohu, the Chatham Islands, rain developing this afternoon or evening, then easing to isolated showers early tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi mō te rā, Iwi. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. They won't clear off, but they're clearing out the town. Wellington businesses are becoming increasingly impatient at the demonstration that is sucking foot traffic away from them. Wellingtonians appear to be giving the Parliament protest a wide berth, meaning nearby businesses are feeling the burn. Two owners have told Checkpoint they've been forced to shut, while for another, the lunchtime rush has totally disappeared. Meanwhile, the protesters remain as resolute as ever. Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
First pandemic policies, now a parliamentary protest like we've never seen before, and Wellington businesses are starting to suffer. Their message is simple: we respect your right to protest, but this is simply too much.
I think the protest and the Whites Junior actually took everyone by surprise.
Grabbed the mask and threw it in my face.
They just wanted to hurt me. There was one particular guy that just wanted to hurt me.
Tracks Bar and Cafe sits in Wellington's deserted railway station. It's lunchtime. The tables should be full, usually far too busy for the manager to take a seat for himself. But today Charlie's doing just that, and he's ready to vent.
This protest, no one wants to come into town. They're not using the trains. Even the bus station's closed. The train station's trying to close. They've closed their platforms during off-peak. It's just getting worse. It's like a ghost town around here.
The protesters are at pains to point out they are a good bunch. They come in peace, but even they concede there are troublemakers in their ranks. And those are the ones that Charlie says do the most damage, the ones that keep the customers away.
A lot of them are very nice. They come in for hot drinks when the storm was here, and it's all good. It's like a little bit like tourism. They're out of towners just coming in for a chat. Oh yeah, this is great. Then the other ones, they're just looking for an argument, looking for a fight, basically.
Welcome to the lunchtime rush through to the businesses surrounding Wellington's train station. There's supermarkets here, there's bars, I can see a cafe as well. For those of you listening, it's not exactly bustling. There would be, well, less than 10 people surrounding me. And for the businesses trying to make a living here, they say enough's enough. Among them is Long Lin, who owns a now boarded up sushi shop just across the road from the protest's western front at the intersection of Bunny and Stout Streets.
In the first week or two, there'll be like 4 or 5 of them sleeping here and drinking here, smoking. It's really hard to ask them to move as well. And I actually got offered $300 a week for them to put a tent in here. Honestly.
He says surrounding public toilets have been vandalised, as has his shop, meaning after-hours visits to clean graffiti off its frontage before eventually pulling the pin and closing altogether today. Long staff saying they are sick of bearing the brunt from what they call a minority of troublemakers.
Getting upset and yelling stuff at us, and it doesn't seem to be connected to us. It just seems to be like a lot of people are just upset and they want to vent. And that is being directed at us sometimes.
This morning, I arrived at 9 o'clock in here, and the lady was standing and then start changing clothes, so I knew she was sleeping in here.
On the opposite side of the occupation, inside the police barricade on Molesworth Street, Liz Mean's home cafe in the shut-down National Library sits empty, a security guard stationed inside the front door.
No business, no income. We are trying to deal with our staff. We're trying to, there's nowhere for our staff. It's actually quite dire.
Means is used to capital protests. Her business is a stone's throw from Parliament's front lawn. But this, she says, is different and shows no signs of disappearing.
There's 3 hot meals a day and they're free, and there's free coffee, there's free tattoos, and it's a village down there. They've just put up road signs yesterday. They had a bouncy castle in there on Saturday for your kids, and they've got a basketball hoop. Why would you rush if you've got nothing else to do?
Trying to intimidate us is not serving and protecting.
And despite the disruption, despite the pleas to pack up, the protesters remain as resolute as ever, 16 days into the occupation. Phil Peters is famous in the camp for his gnarly black eye. He copped a finger to the eye in a skirmish with police.
You can't be free choice, pro-free choice, pro-abortion, pro-free speech, and not be pro the choice to vaccinate or not.
Phil is fully vaccinated, but says he can't accept the mandates and won't leave until they're gone.
I'll be back here every day. I'll be back here bringing supplies when I can. I want to see the Public Health Response Act repealed.
And then there's Michael, here from Whanganui, with his wife, angry after losing the supermarket job he's had for 22 years.
I will get my old age pension, but my wife is younger than me, so I'm going to have to support my wife and all my bills on one flippin' pension.
And as the protesters continue to dig in, it's schools out for those nearby. St Mary's College today following Wellington Girls College and closing down, citing safety concerns. Wellingtonians steering clear of the occupation's central stronghold.
And if you are listening to that on radio, do check out the video. It'll be on our webpage. Wellington Mayor Andy Foster has been criticised for meeting with anti-mandate protesters. One of his colleagues, Councilor Nicola Young, has called it an embarrassment, and she joins us now. Kia ora, Nicola. What's embarrassing about it?
Well, it's really about the pattern of behaviour, because this is not the first time that Andy has gone down to see protesters. I mean, we're supposed to be working together for Wellington, and he is a lone wolf. We didn't know anything about this until we read it in the paper. We have still no idea what was discussed, other than he found it illuminating, and we've had no briefing afterwards. So, I mean, he's the mayor. He should be working with the council. That's what's embarrassing.
So is it an embarrassment for the Human Rights Commissioner to speak to these people, or just for the mayor to speak to them?
No, it's more that the mayor should be working with his council. That's really what's embarrassing, because, you know, the council has been called dysfunctional, and it certainly had problems Australian, and this really highlights one of the issues, which is you have a mayor that doesn't work in tandem with his council. So it's nothing to do with other people going down there. It's about working with the council.
So, Nicola, would you have been okay with it if he told you about it before he did it?
I think I would have had more respect for him, and I certainly wouldn't have been blindsided. Look, I know the protests have caused enormous problems to people who live nearby, but I also totally accept that the mandates are a real issue for people. But I think my point is really just that as a city councillor, it is embarrassing when we have a reputation for being dysfunctional, and then we have an example of this sort of lone wolf behaviour. It would have been more helpful, I think, if Andy had done a stand-up and talked about what the council has been doing, trying to help with the situation, and about the very brave work of some of the council officers down there. I think that would have been more helpful.
So would you be happy to cooperate with him, Nicola, and go down and talk to these people and see if you can find a way through the impasse?
Well, actually, I was going to go down there, and at the time, that was a couple of days ago, I was advised not to go down there. They felt it wasn't safe.
Right. So do you believe that he should continue to speak to people that he calls occupation influencers?
Well, I don't know if anyone knows who the influencers are, and I know he's...
Have you asked him directly if he'll give you some names or tell you?
We haven't heard from him at all. He's disappeared off the radar. This is what happens. It's very difficult. And
so have you tried to give him a call, Nicola? Just to be clear, have you tried to give him a ring and have a discussion about who exactly he met with?
No, but he hasn't been at the meetings that he should have been scheduled, or he was scheduled to be at today. He hasn't been at them. And
did he give a reason or send his apologies for his absence?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so how do you reckon you get through this and get past the impasse with these people?
Oh, I think you'd need someone who's far more skilled in negotiation than me. But I certainly think, there seem to be sort of two groups. There are the people who are there with valid concerns, or, some people think they're valid, some people won't. But then there is a hardcore of people who are there to make trouble.
But if it's not talking to them, Nicola, how do you get past... If it's not talking to them, how do you get past this situation?
It's not the fact that he talked to them. It's the fact that he just did it off his own bat, as he did when he went to Shelley Bay and helped put up the tent. He should be working with his council, keeping us in the loop and communicating with us. And he's not.
Okay, so the other issue there is obviously the protesters won't clear out, but, they are clearing out the CBD foot traffic, and businesses are really feeling it. So
I know.
Who should stump up with some compensation for them, do you think?
Well, I believe we have a package of some measures which are going to come to Council tomorrow to try and help them. I feel desperately concerned about the future of the CBD and the people who live nearby. But, I mean, many businesses are really struggling, and that's a huge concern for me, which is why I've been so staunch about trying to cut expenditure because of the impact on the rates.
So will you support rate relief for these businesses?
Well, of course, the businesses don't pay rate, it's the building owners, so it would have to be that any rates relief would be passed on to the business owners.
And you would support that, Nicola?
Look, in principle, I'd look at it. I mean, I'm not going to say something off the top of my head without knowing the financial implications and the detail of it. That would be irresponsible.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That is Wellington Councilor Nicola Young there. Homai o whakaaro, send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. Should those capital businesses get compensation? What form should it come in? Rates relief? And is the actions of the Mayor there, Mayor Andy, are they an embarrassment? Should he have consulted with his council? What is the way forward? Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai e haere ake nei. Coming up, the Auckland eateries going into hibernation to wait out the Omicron storm. Massive demand for COVID testing means rats will now be the go-to at Auckland testing centres as labs deal with a huge backlog in PCR swabs. There are 3,297 new community COVID cases today. 179 people are in hospital with the coronavirus, 1 in intensive care. As the outbreak grows, the health system is being stretched to its limit with calls to move to phase 3 of the government's Omicron response plan to ease pressure. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Whangarei woman Sarah is recovering from what feels like the flu, but today she got a COVID test after learning she'd been at the same event as a positive case.
They asked me when I got here whether I needed to get the RAT or the PCR. I think they're profiling people, but I wasn't sure, but they've given me the PCR. So I'm guessing that could be a few days wait, so I'll just have to stay at home until it comes through.
And as the Omicron outbreak grows, so too does the wait for test results.
Not ideal. I understand that my husband doesn't have to isolate unless I am positive, so at least he can still go in and out and get supplies, but I guess with the way everything is at the moment, I'll be staying at home with the baby as much as I can anyways.
For some people that wait is already long and is getting longer, like West Auckland man Casey.
I went on Tuesday, I've called today, and it's the 8th day today, and they said no, possibly up to Friday, so that will make it up to the 10 days that I'm meant to be in isolation anyway. So if I come back with a negative test, I'll probably be more upset than a positive, because at least I've gone through my isolation for a reason.
And the wait certainly isn't easy.
Having to have everyone at home for that long, a family of 4, and then the unknown if we have to get retested, and that's another 10 days on that. And then if someone comes from kindergarten or school and they've got another one, that's another 10 days and possibly another 10 days. So feels like it could drag on.
There were 27,750 tests carried out across New Zealand over the past 24 hours, with a 12.2% positive test rate. As the outbreak grows, laboratories are no longer able to pull their PCR testing capacity, which has previously helped reduce pressure in areas with high case numbers. Terry Taylor is the president of the New Zealand Institute of Medical Laboratory Science. He says they're working hard to clear the backlog of tests, but the waits will get worse before they get better.
I cannot stress that enough. People just need to be very patient. Our priorities are the people that need the testing done quickly, so the clinically significant cases where our medical staff need to have a result to be able to clinically follow them up. So that is where our urgent capacity will be, and the rest of the work, we're just going to chug through it.
The Ministry of Health today announced rats will be used as the primary test at all Auckland community testing centres, with sites to decide whether PCR or rapid antigen tests are best for each person. It means symptomatic people and or asymptomatic close contacts whose rat is positive will be considered a case and don't need to be verified through a PCR test. After testing, people will need to record their result in My COVID Record as well as advise their employer. Terry Taylor says the use of rats should mean labs are able to take stock.
We're desperately trying to clear the backlog, and there is a backlog. Everyone is well aware of that, and particularly in the Auckland region, but it's also stretched out to the Waikato region and also to some of the other southern areas as well.
And it's not just labs. As the health sector struggles, there are calls to switch to phase 3 of the government's Omicron response plan. The College of GPs Medical Director Brian Betty told Midday Report that most COVID cases were being looked after well by GPs, but the system was under pressure.
Having to do initial assessments and contact patients either every day or every second day, and that is probably compromising the system a bit in terms of the delivery of service. So I think a move to phase 3 would be welcome in the sector at this point.
There is some good news. As Omicron cases rise, so too are the number of people getting their booster shots. 2.2 million jabs have now been given out across Aotearoa.
The government's called the Russian ambassador in amid growing tensions in Ukraine. Western allies are cracking down on Moscow and have been quick to impose sanctions, but few believe it will prevent further aggression from Vladimir Putin towards Ukraine. The government here is being cautious in regard to issuing its own sanctions on Russia, but the Prime Minister says travel bans and export controls are a possibility. Anei te kai reporter Max Toll.
It's not yet clear whether Russian troops have already marched into the parts of eastern Ukraine Vladimir Putin has deemed independent, but tanks have been spotted on the outskirts of the main rebel city. Satellite imagery also shows new troop and equipment deployments in western Russia near the border. Ukraine is calling up its reserves for military training. An invasion has been ordered and seems inevitable. The Prime Minister today outlined how New Zealand might respond.
New Zealand does have the ability to impose sanctions, but we have traditionally always used a multilateral approach, so the UN as the mechanism to trigger that sanction regime.
As the West condemns Russia, Jacinda Ardern shied away from immediate penalties, but direct measures are still possible.
Travel bans, export controls, diplomatic measures like calling in ambassadors, those are all measures that sit within New Zealand's toolkit and that we are willing to use.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs got the ball rolling by summoning the Russian ambassador to hear her opposition to escalating Russian aggression. The meeting took place at the ministry. The minister herself is in Paris. Nanaya Mahuta expressing her support for Ukraine's sovereignty and calling for diplomacy. But diplomacy is something Vladimir Putin seems allergic to.
Russia has every right to take countermeasures to enhance our own security, and that's how we plan to act.
Sanctions will likely not stop a Russian invasion, but they have come thick and fast in the past 24 hours.
Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors?
Today, US President Joe Biden announced he and the EU were targeting Russian financial institutions and Russia's elite and their families. More measures are coming. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken cancelled plans to meet his Russian counterpart in Geneva later this week, saying Putin's actions had changed the terms.
His plan all along has been to invade Ukraine, to control Ukraine and its people, to destroy Ukraine's democracy, which offers a stark contrast to the autocracy that he leads, to reclaim Ukraine as a part of Russia.
The main fear is that Russia uses the eastern regions as a base for an offensive to capture more Ukrainian land. NATO head Jens Stoltenberg says there's every indication that's the case.
This is the most dangerous moment in European security for a generation. But Europe and North America continue to stand strong together in NATO, united and committed to defend and protect each other.
As for New Zealanders in Ukraine, Jacinda Ardern is still saying come home.
We've already given advice to the roughly between 30 and 40 New Zealanders in the Ukraine to come home if they are willing to do so. And of course, they would fit within the criteria to be supported immediately for space within managed isolation. And within 2 weeks, they also won't even be required to use it.
A word of warning from the New Zealand government as the world eyes Putin's next move.
Auckland cafes and restaurants are having to shut up shop as COVID reaches staff and rising cases keeps customers at home. This comes after the government announced a new COVID support payment for businesses, but hospitality owners say the details are flawed. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi filed this report.
Empty streets, closed signs decorating windows and locked gates, signs of Omicron and red alert. With cases reaching 3,297 today, close contacts are becoming an issue for Peachy on Karangahape Road.
Yesterday, engineer comes into the restaurant to check our pasta boiler, and there's 2 staff members in there. And then later on in the afternoon, he felt sick during the day, and then test positive. And then all of a sudden, I've got there goes my head chef, my sous chef is also off as well because he's got he's feeling sick, and then he's waiting already 4 days for the PCR test.
They've had no option but to close for lunch and try and stay open for dinner with the small team left. Owner Jonathan Tevenard says the next few weeks are a huge gamble.
If the problem's bad now, it's just going to be exacerbated in 2 weeks' time, and I don't really see how we're going to continue trading properly.
Yesterday, the government announced a new COVID support payment of $4,000 plus $400 per full-time employee per fortnight, capped at 50 full-time employees or $24,000. But there's a catch. In order to be eligible, businesses need to show a 40% drop in revenue over 7 days during the 6 weeks prior to the 15th of February, when the government shifted to Phase 2. Owner of Ema Cuisine on Fort Street, Yael Shohart, is grappling with the dates they've chosen.
They want us to compare stage 2 Omicron to red light, where red light we're already terribly down. So we're down stage 2, but not down 40% because we're already down 30% the week before.
Now they're having to shorten their days, closing when customers are scarce.
Yesterday, after the experience I had before, and it was so quiet on the street, it's just so quiet, I thought, okay, there's just no point. I just can't, I'll lose. It's not, if I stay open and I feed 5 people, it's just not sustainable. I lose so much money on salaries and wastage of food. I can't do it.
They can't do work bubbles due to a small team. Yael says it's frustrating a surge in cases might be the tipping point when they've made it this far.
The road behind us is so long and the road in front of us is really not that long. It's the last hurdle, and we are all going to fall off on the last hurdle, which is just heartbreaking. It's such a pity. It's sad.
And they're not alone. Prego restaurant shut yesterday with many staff off work due to COVID. Citizen Park is now closed for 2 days a week, and Little Creatures Brewing at Hobsonville Point have also shut their doors. Staring down a predicted surge in cases next month, they've got this message for Aucklanders.
Just think of the restaurants you love and you think are really worth saving, and do what you can. Buy their vouchers, get their takeaways. I don't know, just help out.
Now, we've got a traffic update before we get to the headlines. There's been a serious crash on Auckland's northwestern motorway. It's now closed northbound between Rosebank Road and Pārtiki Road. So that's Auckland's northwestern motorway, closed northbound between Rosebank Road and Pārtiki Road due to a crash there. There's a detour via Rosebank Road, or the off-ramp there, Pārtiki Road, and then back onto State Highway 16. Now, there is apparently a big backlog, so do expect delays. Kia Kia ora, e te iwi e Hariaki nei e a checkpoint claims the government's emergency COVID laws are out of line and have passed their use-by date. Other countries are imposing sanctions on Russia. We've called in its ambassador for a chat. And the Superwoof Hotel, a dog's poshest friend. Homai o whakaro, we'd love to hear your thoughts on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines. Anei a Evie mina pita pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The government is likely to announce a move to Phase 3 of its Omicron response tomorrow. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins and Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield will make the announcement. The number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the community continues to grow, with 3,297 new infections reported today. There have been at least 2 positive COVID tests among the anti-mandate protesters in Wellington. The Ministry of Health says the infected people have been told to self-isolate. Wellington Mayor Andy Foster has been criticised for meeting with the protesters. One of his colleagues, Councilor Nicola Young, told Checkpoint the mayor's move was an embarrassment as he's behaving like a lone wolf when he's supposed to be working with the council. A mother of students that go to Wellington Girls College and St Mary's College says she's disgusted by the selfishness of the protesters. The schools have directed all students to learn from home because of fears for their safety around the protest. The Reserve Bank has raised its official cash rate by 0.25 percentage point to 1%, but says it's seriously considered a bigger rise. The Prime Minister says New Zealand is ready and willing to use travel bans and export controls to penalise Russia if it invades Ukraine. The Foreign Affairs Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, has called in the Russian ambassador to hear New Zealand's strong opposition to escalating Russian aggression. Meanwhile, Australia has announced sanctions against Russia that include travel bans and financial measures. And the Islamic Women's Council has told a coronial hearing into the Christchurch mosque attacks that Muslims are still in danger of being targeted by terrorists in New Zealand. The Australian gunman who massacred 51 worshippers in 2019 immersed himself in far-right content online. The council has asked the coroner to examine radicalisation on digital platforms as part of the inquiry. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Kia ora ra, e hono mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Reserve Bank has moved to curb rampant inflation and it's going to sting. It's lifting the official cash rate to 1%. Experts say it's going to hurt struggling businesses, first home buyers and the recently indebted, who will see the cost of borrowing go up as well. Katie Todd reports.
The chickens have come home to roost. New Zealand is paying the price for last year's impressive economic rebound. The Reserve Bank says employment is above its maximum sustainable level and inflation is trending above its targets. To combat that, Governor Adrian Orr has unveiled another 25 basis point increase in the whole cash rate this afternoon, bringing it to 1%, with further raises expected. And the Monetary Policy Committee has agreed to gradually reduce the Reserve Bank's bond holdings through bond maturities and managed sales from July.
It remains appropriate to continue to reduce the level of monetary stimulus in the economy so as to maintain price stability and support maximum sustainable employment.
Kiwi Bank Chief Economist Jared Kerr says those actions are the prudent thing to do. But he's got a warning for struggling businesses who might be in for a cooling in consumer spending and see their business lending rates become more expensive as a result.
Businesses who aren't held up in the Omicron outbreak, who aren't struggling at the moment, will keep chugging along. But this is not going to help those who are bogged down by the supply chain issues and the Omicron outbreak.
Banks are also likely to factor the official cash rate rise into their mortgage rates as well, something that comes as a disappointment to First Home Buyers Club director Leslie Harris. She says people looking to get a foothold in the housing market have enough hurdles when it comes to house price hikes and strict lending rules.
I really sympathise with first home buyers. It's just so tough. You know, we're really living in hope that we will see a refreshment of, the Home Start grants and things like that. We're really looking to perhaps get some good news on the first home buyers front, and it is a bit unfortunate that we're starting to see the interest rates climb because that's one of the remaining positives.
Michael Gallagher from financial advice Hawke's Bay says those who've recently taken out substantial debt or a mortgage could also feel a squeeze. He says the message from the Reserve Bank is that interest rates will continue to rise, and he advises looking at long-term fixed-rate mortgages.
Interest rates have gone up 75 basis points since October, and we're talking them going up another 2% potentially by 2023, which is a year away. If you owe $1 million, that's another $20,000 potentially you might have to find. Now that's going to have a big impact. People, I don't think, have that money just lying around to pay additional interest costs, so it's going to be challenging, absolutely.
The Reserve Bank warns in the short term the economy could be knocked around by the current Omicron outbreak. But Finance Minister Grant Robertson is optimistic that it won't last long, and the New Zealand economy is robust enough to cope.
Throughout COVID, and particularly in recent times, the overall New Zealand economy has done well. It's a sector-by-sector thing where the hard times are, and that's why we've stepped up with some additional support. I'm sure that some people will be looking at the way in which their loans are managed and whether or not interest rates will go up. But in terms of Omicron, I think we can get through this pretty quickly and in good shape.
Grant Robertson says it is one of the core roles of the Reserve Bank to manage inflation. By using the lever of interest rates, he says they have responded accordingly.
Okay, let's stick with dollars and cents. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona, let's start with Meridian Energy, right? So this is the energy company. They had a cut price deal for the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter. And that's caused a bit of a dent in the power company's half-year profit?
Yeah, quite a dent, actually. It was a drop of 41% on the year before. That was a net profit of $133 million. Now, they say that basically that's not just because of the Tiwai Point revenue that dropped some $58 million. It was actually as well some losses on power price hedging, which the company typically does to smooth out any volatility in energy pricing. So in any case, Meridian's chief executive Neil Barclay says, look, the growth in their retail business has done very well. They're looking forward to concluding a deal they've done with Trustpower to take over their customer levels. Those are positives. But never mind, the market didn't really like that result and marked them down 5% in the share value.
Okay, well, a different story for Steel and Tube. Their half-year profit tripled thanks to the building boom. Well, no surprises there in rising prices. What did it make?
Well, $14.3 million, and that compares with $4.1 million the year before. So that's a really big increase for the company there. And look, they've done some restructuring. This is a company that was in trouble some years back, and they've seemed to have really turned the corner there. Certainly the market thought so, and their share price rose 4%.
Okay, should we have a whiz around the markets, Nona?
Yeah, look, we ended up 20 points. That's the NZX Top 50 Index to 12,134. That's pretty good, and that reflects what we're seeing in Asia, where stocks are steadying as people start to feel a little bit less worried about Russian troop movements there near Ukraine. The New Zealand dollar really took a big hike up as a result of that interest rate increase by the Reserve Bank to 67.6 US cents, 93.6 Australian, and 49.7 pence.
Ngā mihi Nona, ka kite, that's Nona Peltier with Business News. The government's emergency COVID laws curbing people's freedom of movement have had their time and can no longer be justified, according to a leading QC. Prominent lawyer, Lady Deborah Chambers, believes government rules around isolation are riding roughshod over fundamental rights, and the response needs to change, just like the pandemic has. And Deborah Chambers joins us now. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Good evening.
Can you outline for us, you say the response is no longer justified, these emergency laws. Why?
We have a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights says New Zealanders have fundamental rights. One of those rights that I've been particularly concentrating on is the right to freedom of movement and whilst in New Zealand, and the right of New Zealand citizens to come and go from this country as they choose. That right is fundamental. Legislation says so. It's only subject to one exception, and that is that if there are reasonable limits which can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. In my view, given the situation now with Omicron and vaccination levels and very low death levels, you simply cannot justify under the Bill of Rights the lack of freedom of movement.
Do you think it was justified when we had a different type of outbreak, and it's just with the Omicron strain that the pendulum has swung in another direction?
I do. I think when we were first dealing with a much more serious strain, we didn't have vaccination, we didn't really know very much about it. Quite a different situation. Now we know a huge amount about Omicron. We're seeing what's happening overseas with the UK and plenty of other countries, and in fact our fellow Antipodeans, Australia, loosening all their rules and simply not having a catastrophic result. And we're on the same planet, and we're dealing with the same thing.
So in terms of freedoms, you are particularly talking about the fact that people are still having to self-isolate, will still have to self-isolate when they return from overseas, and close contacts here in New Zealand and cases have their movement restricted when they have to isolate. So what are you saying, that they should just be allowed to free to move around as they like, even if they are infected?
I do. I'm saying that we've reached the point where there ought to be guidance, there ought to be encouragement to stay home if you're sick, just like any other bug, and there ought to be encouragement to wash your hands regularly, do social distancing in appropriate places and so on. But the draconian rules which says you go home and stay home and you stay in that house, and if someone else comes in that gets infected, they have to stay home too, and so do your family, and you end up being home for a very long period of time. When this thing, we know the death rates, we know who's vulnerable, and we know that 95% of our people have been double jabbed, and they have a very small chance of dying from this disease.
Deborah, you know that there will be a pile-in probably after this conversation that we're having, a wave of feedback, and one of the main things that people will raise is that this policy of isolation and closed borders has saved people's lives, and we should be grateful for that.
I don't dispute that, and I'm not disputing the earlier policies. I am limiting my comments to now, the situation now. When facts change, you ought to relook at them and look at your opinions. And to some extent, our government has done that. But what I'm concerned about is that there hasn't been any real discussion or conversation of our Bill of Rights, which is supposed to fundamentally guarantee New Zealanders' rights, and yet it's just not. It seems to be overlooked completely, and that's one of the balance issues which I think is out of balance. I do feel if we're going to have a Bill of Rights, which says these are our fundamental rights, that ought to be part of the conversation. Is this demonstrably justified now?
Okay, so if you think in your legal assessment looking at this, it's no longer justified, why isn't someone taking a legal challenge? Why are there not a bunch of lawyers or other people sticking their heads up and saying, time to test this?
Well, I think that's a very good question. And there have been some legal challenges, largely on the mandate issue, which is more complicated in terms of rights. And there was an early one that went to the Court of Appeal in the first round of COVID, the Delta COVID, which failed. I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think one of the reasons is that the situation kept changing. Everyone thought it was going to be over soon. We kept thinking, well, it's only for a few more weeks and then we'll be back to normal. But that just hasn't happened. I also think it's only really now that this situation really arises with the fact that we have vaccinations and we have drugs which are much more effective against COVID now than what we ever did before. So I think that changed situation has happened. But I do say that, you know, there should be more people speaking, including the legal profession, expressing concerns about this, because we have this legislation. It is important, and there ought to be issues raised by lawyers in regard to the fact that the legislation is either not being applied properly or is not working properly.
Interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Lady Deborah Chambers, QC there, speaking about the government's emergency COVID laws. It is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki ina pita kōrero. After the news at 6, Russia's top rep in New Zealand gets called in for a please explain. The Omicron outbreak's taking its toll on paramedics, with Auckland down 9 ambulances on Saturday night because of a lack of staff. St John is putting it down to illness and self-isolation, compounded by a shortage of healthcare workers, which it says is affecting the entire sector. But workers say the issues are much bigger than COVID and urgent intervention is needed. Ko Nita Blake Person anō tēnei.
St John paramedics are banned from speaking to the media. Their contracts forbid it. But alarmed over ongoing delays in ambulance response times, several have contacted Checkpoint to speak out. This man, who we'll call Tom, was working in Auckland over the weekend, where staffing shortages meant at one point they were 9 ambulances down across the city on Saturday night. Urgent code red calls were waiting up to 40 minutes, and it was even longer for those supposedly less urgent. These are Tom's words, but not his voice.
Calls deemed less urgent, orange, which is less immediately life-threatening, but we're still supposed to be there within 20 minutes. We're just waiting hours and hours, and a lot of patients were just being told, can you just try to get in the car? Can you just do whatever? The staff, we're just worn out. We're just going around and around, trying to go from call to call to get to who we can and then apologising every time.
Tom's speaking up now because he sees shifts getting worse and worse, and he's not confident plans put in place by St John to manage COVID demand are working.
They brought some staff up to have someone on these COVID trucks, and they get paid money by the government, extra to run these special vehicles for COVID. But they just pull people off normal ambulances to do it and then don't cover those. It's just really robbing Peter to pay Paul. Doesn't really actually, improve our staffing at all.
Working full-time and constantly being asked to do overtime or cover shifts is exhausting for Tom. He says he's buggered. He has no faith in St John's senior leadership and says it's about time the government took some accountability for the ambulance service.
I don't know if it's necessarily going to fix things, but it feels like something needs to change, and there needs to be more oversight and more visibility.
This paramedic, who we'll call Ryan, is also sounding the alarm. Physically and emotionally exhausted from racing from one job to the next and embarrassed at constantly apologising to patients and their family for being late, he says something needs to change.
It's a collective cry for help, and not pointing the blame at anyone, but kind of trying to show accountability, I think, to the government to do something about it.
St John says it's brought in 500 additional paid frontline ambulance officers over the past 5 years and is introducing a major shake-up to its leadership structure. That aims to have 84 more frontline leadership roles by October, meaning no line manager will have more than 70 direct reports. Previously, it was around 144. It's also introducing a new critical care model, which includes a higher skilled paramedic deployed by rapid response vehicle to the most serious incidents. Ryan says he's wary of laying the blame with St John, but something needs to change.
We're all trying our best to meet demands as best we can. St John is trying to put on the resources, but when you're already doing 42 hours in a week and then you're doing 60 hours a week, back-to-back weeks, it can be quite challenging to meet those demands. The burnout rate is the highest I think I've ever seen it at the moment.
It's the lack of time with patients that's really getting to him.
I'm trying to take my time, build a rapport with the family and provide care, knowing that there's 4 other people that don't have other people there, that are either waiting outside in the cold, that have fallen over and broken their leg while it's raining, and I know I need to finish up where I am so I can go help them. So I'm distracted in multiple places at once.
While staffing shortages seem to be particularly bad in Auckland, they're being felt right across the country. Mark Quinn is a paramedic in the Manawatu and is the secretary for the New Zealand Ambulance Association. He says they were down 3 ambulances on a recent night shift.
Sort of 10, 15 years ago, ambulances only attended road accidents and severe chest pains, and now we're doing everything, from palliatives through to mental health, through to community-related places where there's no GP.
He's not convinced that a government takeover is the answer to improve things, but admits delays are a problem at the moment.
One of the things we could be looking at is not responding to low acuity jobs that tie up ambulances, and they're only leaving us free for the like I stated previously, the real emergency.
In a statement, St John said its absences on Saturday night were due to illness and self-isolation, compounded by the healthcare professional shortage affecting the entire health sector. It was down 5 ambulances between 6 p.m. and midnight, 9 down between midnight and 3 a.m, and 6 down between 3 and 6 a.m. St John has not yet identified any clinical adversity associated with delayed response times on Saturday night.
Right, a few of you getting in touch already about our interview with Lady Deborah Chambers QC. She reckons that the government's emergency COVID laws have, had their time and can no longer be justified in law. Well, divided opinion on this one. This listener says, this lawyer clearly isn't on the same planet. We still don't know the full extent of how Omicron will affect our minorities, the elderly, the vulnerable. Tell her we'll get her back on in mid-March. Another says, what about the rights of healthcare workers not to burn out? I think one of her points is, as more and more people go into isolation, it will place more stress on healthcare workers. And finally, this one. I absolutely support Deborah, and you'll be amazed how much the mood has changed. And many New Zealanders also do. The government is micromanaging this too much. Keep your feedback coming. Text us on 2101. Misinformation researchers are concerned the protest at Parliament is vulnerable to being captured by extremists as the idea of any leadership within the blockade area slips away. In recent days, the messaging among the demonstrators has noticeably fractured as more outsiders arrive at the camp. Anei te kai reporter Jake McKee, who filed this report.
Singer Jason Kerrison did a series of Facebook Live videos on Tuesday, saying it's about capturing his own experiences and no one else's.
And I don't quite know what's happened yet, so I've just come down, got out of bed, and what I can tell you, what I do see is...
He makes his way northward from the blockade area to Molesworth Street.
I think this is where the aggression happened this morning. And so dumb, people talking about throwing feces, and it's like, what are they talking about? That was not happening, did not happen, and people need to stop watching mainstream news,
In reality, that commotion he mentions was a man who was arrested for driving a vehicle towards a line of police officers, stopping just before he would have hit them. And the human faeces incident, which a number of protesters claim didn't happen, was on Monday. Kerrison is correct when he suggests throughout his live streams that there are calm people in the crowd. But Te Pūnaha Matatini misinformation researcher Sanjana Hatatua says the presence of extreme or far-right views can't be ignored. He says it's more noticeable in online channels connected to the protest.
And I empathise with individuals who don't know that, because it's to and connection to and engagement with the online fora to realise the degree to which this has gone, and gone in a very bad way.
Sanjana Hatatua says it's the words people use, similar to that scene around the insurrection in the United States on the 6th of January last year. RNZ has spoken to a number of the protesters in recent days. We asked if it's okay to be in a crowd that's not necessarily as peaceful as it preaches, with signs targeting politicians, media and scientists. Some didn't like that there were death threats.
That's not on, they just need to go. There's no reason for that, but yeah, people are angry though. That's what the problem is.
I think it's just a terrible to get personal, terrible to attack politicians.
But others weren't bothered or say the threats don't exist.
That's all around us, mate. That's every day. You can go to Auckland or Christchurch or a little town, Ekatahuna. You don't know who's around.
We haven't seen anything like that. Everyone's peaceful. You go inside there, all you feel is love, all you feel is the emotion of the passion of the people.
These fractions appear to be growing in an increasingly individualised crowd, and disinformation researcher Byron Clark says it's becoming a free-for-all. Police have acknowledged there's no real leadership, and Byron Clark says there's also more conflicting information and ideas among protesters.
It makes it very difficult because it means that there's not really anyone who police can negotiate with, or if any politicians were to come out and meet the protesters, there's not really anyone who can truly claim to represent them.
He says people are being influenced on mainstream social media like YouTube and Facebook before migrating to platforms with less moderation like Telegram and Rumble.
So I think social media has been slow to act, and it's a case now of we probably can't put that genie back in the bottle, and we have to find other ways to deal with the issue of misinformation online.
As the protest lingers on, it's clearly no longer a crowd with the same unity of purpose against COVID-19 mandates that turned up at Parliament 16 days ago.
New Zealand's top athletes will be celebrated at the Halberg Awards in Auckland tonight. The annual awards are back after a year off due to COVID-19 playing havoc with the sporting calendar. But with the red light in place, the traditional big gala will look a little different this year, with only 100 people allowed there. Sports reporter Felicity Reid joins us now. So, Felicity, the judges are going to have to make some tough decisions this year, aren't they?
Well, Lisa, looking at this list of 28 finalists, there will have been some very close calls and some quite clear ones. So remembering tonight's winners, we'll cover off the achievements from December 2019 to November 2021. So we're talking Olympics, Paralympics, a World Test Championship, and an America's Cup amongst these finalists. So that's a bit of comparing gold medals with a mace and an old mug and deciding on some winners. But kayaker Dame Lisa Carrington, 3 Olympic gold medals in Tokyo, that's going to be hard to beat in the sportswomen category, even though there are 2 other gold medalists, a bronze medalist, a 3-time world champion, all in her category. But there's also suggestions that she's a shoo-in for that Supreme Award too.
So, Felicity, outside of Dame Lisa, are there any other sort of head-to-heads that have caught your eye?
Team of the Year might be a hard one to pick, and it's a category where I think those who don't win could feel a little bit hard done by. It's the World Test Championship Black Caps up against the Olympic gold medal winning Blackburn 7 side, the gold medal winning men's rowing 8, the champion women's rowing pair, as well as an America's Cup winning Team New Zealand. So that's a bit of success to be weighing up there. And the other one I'd be keeping an eye on would be the para-athlete category. All participants in this category have gold medals, so that's going to be splitting hairs between Paralympic gold medalist long jumper Anna Grimaldi, javelin athlete Holly Robertson, and they go head-to-head with the swimmers that we all know, Dame Sophie Pascoe, and then newcomer Tupu Nifi and shot putter Lisa Adams, who broke all those records on the way to her Olympic gold.
And just before you head off, Felicity, how late do we have to stay up to hear the results?
We'll start hearing some of the results from 8 o'clock and then they'll filter through and RNZ will have it up on our website by later this evening.
Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid, sports reporter there on the Halberg Awards tonight. More of your feedback now on our interview with Lady Deborah Chambers. This person says, hallelujah, some real common sense from Lady Deborah Chambers. Read the Bill of Rights and also really need to weigh up the collateral damage for the population at large from the COVID management strategies. Time to move on like the rest of the world. And all the data and date, I say the science. And this person says, fully agree with the QC, open up. We are all going to come into contact with Omicron. Why drag it out? This listener, though, says, all I can say in response to the interview with the Lady Deborah is thank goodness our government is listening to health experts and not lawyers as they set our pandemic response. What a selfish point of view to focus on rights and not responsibilities. She does not speak for me. On the subject of rapid antigen tests, this listener says in Victoria, Australia rat tests have been available to the public for some time. At supermarkets, chemists and school children are required to take them at least twice a week so they continue to go to school safely. If you self-test positive, you are legally required to report to the health authority. There is a website, covidlive.com.au, which reports these results every day. You can see where cases are by punching in your postcode. It is a much better system, says this listener.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The government is likely to announce a move to Phase 3 of its Omicron response tomorrow. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins and Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield will make the announcement. A move to Phase 3 will see further changes to contact tracing, which will mean only the highest risk contacts will need to isolate. A record number of cases was reported today, 3,297. There have been huge queues at testing stations and the wait for results is getting longer, including for this West Auckland man.
I went on Tuesday. I've called today, and it's the 8th day today, and they said no, possibly up to Friday. So that will make it up to the 10 days that I'm meant to be in isolation anyway. So if I come back with a negative test, I'll probably be more upset than a positive because at least I've gone through my isolation for a reason.
There have been at least 2 positive COVID tests among the anti-mandate protesters in Wellington. The Ministry of Health says the infected people have been told to self-isolate. It wouldn't say if the cases are among those who have been arrested in the past few days. A Wellington City Councilor says the Mayor, Andy Foster, is acting as a lone wolf who's not working with councillors and dealing with the Parliament protesters. Mr Foster recently said he'd met with some of them. Councillor Nicola told Checkpoint Mr Foster did this off his own bat and has now gone to ground.
It's not the fact that he talked to them, it's the fact that he just did it off his own bat, as he did when he went to Shelley Bay and helped put up the tent. He should be working with his council, keeping us in the loop and communicating with us.
Nicola said Mr Foster was not at his scheduled meetings today and she hadn't been informed of a reason why. The Reserve Bank is expecting house prices to fall by nearly 10% over the next 2 to 3 years. It comes as the central bank hiked the official cash rate by 25 basis points to 1% this afternoon as it looks to combat strong inflation pressures. Facing rising interest rates and changing house prices, the bank says household balance sheets are robust with significant equity in their homes. But the Reserve Bank Governor, Adrian Orr, says there'll be small pockets of New Zealanders for whom it won't be smooth sailing.
Particularly those who have recently taken on large levels of debt, who will be in a position where they may need to manage negative equity in their home for some time.
But Adrian Orr says interest rates remain low and banks should have been testing people's ability to weather a broad range of rates. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says there'll be no general mobilisation of the country's armed forces, but he's calling up reserves for training. He insists diplomacy can still work, as the BBC's Orla Guerin reports.
Tonight, the embattled Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky has called up reserves for a limited period. He's ruled out a general mobilisation, saying that he's still looking for a diplomatic path out of the crisis. But there is more at stake here than the future of Ukraine. There are long-term implications for the security and stability of Europe. The feeling here is that President Putin has made one more move in a long game, and he may be waiting now to gauge the strength of the international reaction before he moves again.
A coroner has heard better moderation by digital platforms could have alerted authorities to the Christchurch terrorist before he went on to murder 51 people. Jean Edwards reports.
The Islamic Women's Council has repeatedly complained to the government and media companies about the amount of hatred posted online. But spokeswoman Alia Danzeisen has told a coronial hearing digital platforms have been unwilling or unable to tackle radicalisation online. The terrorist immersed himself in far-right internet forums. She says it's possible he would have been caught if his virtual life had been better monitored. Ms Danzeisen says the council's leadership has been threatened with poisoning, rape and killing since the massacre in 2019. She says Muslims are still in danger of being targeted by terrorists in New Zealand.
And Hong Kong is planning compulsory mass testing in a bid to curb a growing COVID outbreak. Tough isolation measures are also being introduced. Our correspondent Richard Kimber reports from Hong Kong.
Every one of Hong Kong's 7.5 million residents will undergo 3 rounds of mandatory testing in March, with hundreds of testing centres being set up across the city. People will also be asked to do additional tests every day at home. Anyone who tests positive will be isolated at facilities ranging from large-scale temporary government isolation wards, many of which are currently under construction, to public housing units and designated hotel rooms. Chief Executive Carrie Lam says the plan will identify all the virus carriers in the community and stop the spread. Some health experts say the process won't work unless it's accompanied by a full city lockdown.
And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, how do you navigate in space? How do you tell your east from your west when it's all relative? I mean, a compass isn't going to help. The BBC investigates. Diana Noonan, winner of the 2022 Margaret Mahy Medal, a suitable reward after writing over 100 books for children and young adults. And this week's Hump Prize, the museum from its origins to the 21st century, a magnificent illustrated guide by Owen Hopkins. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Taupo, fine apart from isolated showers, mainly afternoons or evenings, possibly heavy in Waikato and Bay of Plenty today. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy. Showers becoming widespread in Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay today and in Gisborne tomorrow morning. Showers are clearing in Wairarapa later tomorrow. Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumarunui and Taihape, also Nelson and Marlborough. Partly cloudy today with isolated showers in Nelson and Marlborough. Tomorrow is fine. Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin, mostly cloudy with fine breaks in the afternoons. Drizzle is possible in North Otago and Dunedin tonight and tomorrow morning. Bulla, mostly cloudy, a few showers, possibly heavy today. Westland and Fiordland, fine apart from isolated showers. Central Otago, Clutha and Southland, two fine days. Chatham Islands, rain developing this afternoon or evening, then easing to isolated showers early tomorrow. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. As the West cracks down on Russia with sanctions, the New Zealand government's called its ambassador in for a please explain. In Te Piramia, Jacinda Ardern says travel bans and export controls are a possibility. The US president says Russia is violating international law by ordering troops into eastern Ukraine, and NATO says there's every indication Russia is planning a full-scale attack. Back here, local Ukrainians are worried for their friends and family. Ukrainian Association member Yuri Shuri joins us now. Hi Yuri, can you tell us what your friends and family are telling you about the situation in Ukraine?
Hi, good evening and добрый вечер to everyone, to all New Zealand listeners. My family is living in Ukraine, and western parts of Ukraine, which is reasonably peaceful part of Ukraine comparing to the eastern part. But regardless of that, the feelings over there is, and stress over there is on top of the roof, right? So people are really, really waiting for the worst. Hard to say how things will develop, but all indications, as we can see, on the ground, or even what we're watching around newspapers and all this media is indicating that Russia will not stop. That's what barbarians like to do.
So are they preparing for war, Yuri?
Yes, it will be war. Unfortunately, that will be war. It's impressions that people have on the ground. It's impressions that we have here. Look, it's history going to its cycle, right? Say the Russians start together with Germans second war, and they about to start third war. That's the impression that Ukrainians got. And the thing is, Russia is not the only enemy to Ukrainians. Everyone must understand that Russia is an enemy to all free world.
So
that's how they're behaving, no rules.
With the people you know, Yuri, are they planning to leave Ukraine for safety reasons, or how are they preparing?
No, well, look, I had conversation with people my age, younger than me and older. No one really want to leave. Perhaps if situation would deteriorate, people will try to save kids. That's only there people would be probably logically any parent would do, right? But no one wants to live, and many people have nowhere to go. What's the point to go, say, to Poland or Hungary or Germany or elsewhere? What would you do there?
So here in New Zealand, we've seen videos of people training how to use weapons and guns. Is this widespread?
Well, I would say maybe not a widespread, but that's become common in the recent days or weeks or months, right? Well, first of all, remember that a lot of Ukrainians, no matter from which part they are, they have been fighting against Russia in a certain degree over the last 8 years. So a lot of people have some experience, and they want to share that experience how to protect the family, not to escalate the situation, isn't it?
So we have heard today that our Foreign Affairs Minister, has ordered the Russian Federation ambassador in to have a talking to, and that New Zealand has expressed its strong opposition to the actions being taken by Russia in recent times. So the ambassador's had a telling off. I mean, is that enough? What should New Zealand be doing?
Well, look, yes, I have read about that. It's New Zealand, we got the impression, right, in Ukrainians in New Zealand, that New Zealand government at the moment, it's a bit running behind comparing to many other countries for some reason, especially the countries from this five countries consolidation or whatever we call it, right, 5-0 or 5 I's. Strong opposition to a situation, it's nice to say, but need a bit more probably action, a bit more proactive.
Like what, Yuri? Do other countries are saying that they're imposing sanctions? So would you like to see that from New Zealand or what?
Yes, I would say so. That makes sense to show the solidarity with the rest of the world, isn't it?
So should we continue trading with Russia at the moment?
Well, look, I'm not in a position to say how big trade we're actually having with Russia, taking into account that we are far away from Russia. We're not selling much to Russia after 2014 because New Zealand was imposing some sanction at that time, and a lot of trade was stopped in 2014. So I'm not quite sure. I can't comment on this one. But, well, if we can limit something, would be probably wise to do.
Yuri, and I mean, how worried are you about your family at the moment who still live there?
Well, look, it could be a situation that I would never be able to see them. Say, my father is 81. He's not mobile. He's stay at home, so he have no chance to escape. My mother is 72, the same thing. Or my father-in-law, he's 75, the same thing. So that's where we talk with my wife, who probably would be in a situation we would never see them.
Yuri, I really appreciate your time this evening and all the best to you and your family. That is Yuri Shuri, who is a Ukrainian in New Zealand and a member of the Ukrainian Association here. A doctor who sent 600 anti-COVID vaccination tests to patients has been appealing his suspension in court today. Dr. Matthew Shelton discouraged patients from getting the vaccine and allegedly told another the Prime Minister faked her vaccination. He's in the first group of 3 doctors at the Medical Council stood down for spreading COVID misinformation late last year. Sam Ollie reports.
Dr. Matthew Shelton discouraged children and fertile women from getting vaxxed. He also allegedly said Jacinda Ardern didn't get the jab. The Medical Council's lawyer Simon Mount QC says Dr. Shelton's views are dangerous and his suspension is justified.
The damage Dr. Shelton has caused in the local community is mammoth. There was a view that people require a person of trust, but that Dr. Shelton's behaviour had compromised patient safety.
Dr. Shelton was a GP at the Plympton Medical Centre. He's accused of implying to a patient that more than 80 people in Aotearoa had died from COVID vaccine side effects. The council also cites anti-vax statements he made to media, on social media and at public gatherings. Here he is using misinformation to rally the crowd outside Parliament last Friday.
Including you, the police, who have also been tricked into taking God knows what into your bodies.
That's right. Yeah. But Dr. Shelton's lawyer, Matthew McClelland QC, says his client has always acted on strong beliefs and informed consent. He feels obliged to share his vaccine doubts.
The Medical Council does not have the right to dictate to a practitioner, including Dr. Shelton, that you must effectively sing the party line and speak only positive things about the vaccine. If he has concerns, he has a right to express those concerns.
Matthew McClelland QC says some complaints were hearsay and Dr. Shelton denies them. The doctor has also acknowledged the texts went too far and has apologised.
He did it in a rush. He regrets doing it the way he did. Technologically, maybe he's not as astute as some because I think he pressed the wrong button and the text message went to a lot of people that he wasn't intending to go to.
600, wasn't it, I think?
Something like that, sir. So it was a bad day at the office.
Mr. McClelland says the suspension brought terrible stigma and his client had sought advice from the Medical Council earlier last year, asking how he could express his vaccination doubts without disapproval, but heard nothing back.
The Medical Council doesn't engage. It doesn't say, no, you're talking through a hole in the head. That doesn't support your position or it's from a whole bunch of crackpots or anything. It doesn't engage at all.
Judge Stephen Harrop will reserve his decision. Retired radiologist Dr. Peter Canaday is also appealing his suspension tomorrow. The third doctor suspended in December for anti-vax views, psychiatrist Dr. Emmanuel Garcia, has withdrawn his appeal.
It is 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Let's get some of your feedback about the ongoing protest in Wellington. This one from Sharon says, I know that some Wellington schools are inevitably going to have to go online due to Omicron, but schools having to close due to safety reasons because of the protest, where is their human right to the freedom to be educated? These misinformed, disruptive protesters need to go home. And on the subject of Andy Foster, the Mayor of Wellington, meeting with some of the protest influencers, some councillors not happy about that. This listener says ratepayers paid $30,000 for a leadership training course Andy attended, so we have full confidence in him solving this matter. Yeah, right. Regards, Anne. Thanks for your feedback. The Buller district is still recovering from torrential rain and flooding that caused widespread damage to infrastructure earlier this month. Te Pitamia, Jacinda Ardern, arrived in Westport this morning for a briefing with flood recovery staff before visiting some of the worst affected areas in the region. Our reporter Samantha G and cameraman Samuel Rillstone were there.
You don't have to travel far north of Westport to see the destruction caused by extreme rainfall in early February. On Powerhouse Road, a bridge was washed away in the deluge. A couple and their 2 young children who live in the area made headlines when they were rescued by helicopter from a tractor on their farm. A few kilometres away, Alan Serra says he knew things weren't good when he looked out across his front lawn.
I ended up with some strange coloured water on my front lawn, which was never been there before, and I looked and it was a dark grey colour. So I gathered from that we had a major blowout up here, so I shot up on my bike and saw this. This was a lot worse than this, but this is what I found.
The Christmas Creek Bridge is gone and a chasm has opened up next to what used to be a pristine waterway. He says the flooding in the last 7 months has been gut-wrenching for Westport and the wider Buller community.
The immediate solution would be to get the rivers sorted. They're going to have to do that anyway. The flood walls are going to be a wee way off. I mean, here we are, we're 7 months since the July floods, and nothing's been done, nothing. I know there are plans afoot in regards to the flood walls, but meantime, I think we need to give the residents some sort of assurance that they're not going to get flooded again, and it unfortunately hasn't happened.
Buller Flood Recovery Manager Bob Dixon says the impact on those in rural areas was unprecedented. 70 farms across the district have been affected, suffering a loss of production, silted paddocks, losing feed and having fences destroyed. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern today announced another $500,000 in funding for Task Force Green, for those on farms and in rural areas to access support to help with the clean-up.
We visited a site today and it's absolutely clear that in contrast to the July flooding, rural areas, farmland has been really hit with this weather event. So making sure that support's in place for that clean-up will be important.
She says government needs to work with local councils to build greater flood resilience on the West Coast.
Council has begun to work up plans around what water infrastructure is needed. They have a long list of projects around roading, but in the longer term we've said we want to work with them out to about June or July to come up with a plan that will help with future flooding events.
An initial damage assessment by the Buller District Council has put the cost of damage between $21.5 and $43 million.
None of the choices here are easy. We've seen the devastation that significant weather events are having in this area. We want people to have the confidence that when they're building their homes or rebuilding their homes, that they'll be there to stay and to last. And so it's a really difficult task ahead.
Infrastructure teams across the district are still assessing the damage, with the list of repair works growing.
If you're listening to that on radio, do check out the video, which was filmed by cameraman Samuel Rillstone. It'll be on our webpage. Now, another update on the serious crash on Auckland's northwestern motorway. The motorway is closed northbound between Rosebank Road and Pātiki Road. The detour is in place, but Waka Kotahi is recommending people go another way or delay their journey. There is a tail and it goes all the way back to the city. Now, the police are on site with a serious crash investigation now underway, which is expected to take a few hours. The short message there is take another route if you're able to. Hundreds of COVID care packages are being delivered to isolating Otago University students as COVID spreads. The student flatting strip, Castle Street, and parties held there were recently identified as locations of interest. That's forced hundreds of contacts into isolation. The Students' Association is helping pack and deliver the parcels, and President Melissa Lama is expecting demand to last for a couple of months yet.
Through our student support services here at Otago University Students Association, we are just putting together some welfare packages, which is in the form of food, sanitary items for students who have become either positive or are self-isolating due to close contact. And what they do is they apply through the hub and then we just deliver to the houses. Yep.
So what kind of demand are you expecting or do you have at the moment?
At the moment, we're doing just over 200 packages today, and it's looking as though with the amount of students going to get tested, looking at the numbers that were put out by Public Health, it'll probably rise by 500 in the morning or by tonight, and then it'll work up in those sort of numbers because students are coming forward and getting tested, which is really good to see in terms of social responsibility and accountability. Yep.
That's a lot of students who are stuck at home for a reasonable period of time.
Yeah, it is. And so the good thing about with us, sound like I'm plugging us in all the time here, is that we do offer wellbeing support via the hub. We offer reading materials in these packages as well as some form of board games or something to keep them occupied while in isolation.
So from what you're hearing, what is it like for students in student accommodation where they have to stay locked down in isolation?
Oh, it's obviously they'd like to be out and about, especially with, O Week this week and being a part of the events that we're putting on within guidelines. But students are saying it's boring and they'd rather be doing something else, but they understand why they have to do it. Yeah.
There'd be some pretty full houses, wouldn't there, Melissa?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And that's the one thing that we're aware of is that when a student applies for support, we also have to consider who else is in that flat because there'll be a close contact.
Are they sticking by the rules and staying home for the number of days that they're supposed to?
I wish I could go in on every student and what they're doing in their houses, but, look, I couldn't tell you exactly. I like to say that they are, and I hope that they are, and I have every faith that majority are, but you just never know. And we only hear about it really if the media pick it up or if it comes through social media. But, the majority of students are, and I'd like to say all of them are, but who knows there, Lisa.
Yeah, so what is your message to students about following the rules?
Oh, look, I just want to encourage them. First of all, I acknowledge the hard and challenging times that we're in. What a crap way to start, your university journey, and like every other year, it's different. The experience on campus is not necessarily the same. But if anything, just keep up with the scanning and the mask and the contact tracing as much as possible. But reach out to OUSA. This is we've been preparing for this, and we are their go-tos as a college, as sort of a residential college. So please reach out. Don't sit at home alone, and we'll find a way to help you. And if we can't, we'll find someone who can. Yeah.
How long are you expecting to be giving out these packages for then?
Well, looking at the current government's, narrative at the moment with all the things happening, I'd say at least a good 6 weeks, my predictions, or 2 months. You just never know with COVID at the moment, Lisa.
And how are you paying for it all, or who pays?
Yes, it's a collaboration. The university, Otago University, has been really, really good in supporting with the welfare approach of the Otago University Student Association. So, I've been using my role to go and make them aware of the situation, and they are aware as well, and they've been forthcoming in supporting with the resourcing of the packages and the services that we offer.
So O Week has changed, right? COVID has changed O Week, and the big events, they're not happening. But, well, are students still having their own kind of off-the-radar parties?
As you've seen in the media, there's been stories of that happening, but, you know, as of lately, no, we haven't, and that I've been aware of, and we have been pushing the narrative on you know, just chilling out for a bit and getting through the current environment that we're in as safely as possible. That's really our focus at the moment in the narrative that we're pushing when it comes to student parties. But with O Week, big events were cancelled. Yes, they were, but we are providing events within the guidelines, like movie nights on the Union Lawn, which was safe, social distancing, as well as, you know, breakout rooms with gaming, like time zone type of setups for students to go to. Yep.
So is it completely changing the culture on campus and campus life, COVID?
Oh, compared to every other year, yes, I would say so. It just has to happen, Lisa, and I do feel bad for students that it's not quite what they expected. But, you know, I think it's a realisation that there's a lot of things outside of our control at the moment. And one thing I always tell students is it's bigger than ourselves at the moment. It's bigger than our want to have this full-on O Week, you know, campus experience. It's really about us doing our bit for the rest of the country and the community at the moment. Yeah.
And that's Melissa Lama from the Otago University Students Association. 5 stars is usually the highest rating a luxury hotel can get, but in Cape Town there's one establishment that believes it deserves a 6th star. The Superwoof Hotel provides a luxury service for dogs. The BBC's Muhammad Ali looks at what's on offer.
It's mid-morning and the guests at the Superwoof Hotel, as you can hear, are full of energy. It's here where some spend a few hours while the owners are at work, while others stay up to a few weeks or even months while their owners are out of town. But before being allowed to enjoy the comforts of the hotel, the dogs have to meet certain criteria.
My name is Bianca Cooch. I am the co-founder of Superwoof Dog Hotel and Daycare in Cape Town, South Africa. The key thing that we make sure of is that all of our dogs are completely fully vaccinated, including a kennel cough vaccine, which is an elective vaccine by vets, but it is mandatory for all dogs coming into a boarding facility. And the other thing is that we make sure that all dogs over 6 months old are sterilized. That's for several behavioral issues that we do start noticing in the teenage phase. So we just try and minimize any risk of an altercation.
Starting around midday, each of the groups of dogs who are kept together with others of similar size get a chance to get some fresh air and have a bit of fun. We're on the sky deck now. There's a pool and, believe it or not, a few lounges as well, and a ring with real grass as well as astroturf. It's playtime for the little ones now. They've come out for a run on the sky deck. It looks like everyone is just doing their own thing. Okay, so this is a storeroom where the dogs' belongings are kept, believe it or not.
They've each got their own locker. We make sure that it's carefully labelled and logged, photographed, so that we really take care of all of the clients' belongings as well.
During their stay at the hotel, the furry fellas also develop close friendships that can sometimes lead to bigger things, as Bianca Cooch explains.
Amongst other events, we did have a wedding last year between Joey and Suki. They met coming up the elevator to daycare and subsequently became absolutely inseparable. And the idea came about for us to host a little gathering for their union. So we hosted on the sky deck. Suki had her veil, Joey had some flowers on his collar, and we got some cupcakes and enjoyed some shampoos, and it was quite the celebration.
So, not only do the canines revel in being spoilt, they're also very much up for sniffing out the right partner and eventually tying the knot.
That sounds pricey. That's about all we've got time for. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. And remember, if you missed anything on the show, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, where are all the rapid antigen tests and why do we still have so many people in MIQ when we have thousands of community COVID cases? First up, asks Grant Robertson. Kei te hoki mai anō a pōpō whānau pō Mārie. The whole whānau will be be back same time, same place tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The government is likely to announce a move to phase 3 of its Omicron response tomorrow. The move will see changes to contact tracing. There have been at least 2 positive COVID tests among the anti-mandate protesters in Wellington. A Wellington City Councilor says the Mayor, Andy Foster, is acting as a lone wolf and not working with councillors in dealing with the protesters. And the Reserve Bank is expecting house prices to fall by nearly 10% over the next 2 to 3 years. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7 o'clock.
Balancing the different voices was a key to a successful police operation. So a little bit the velvet glove and the iron fist.
Wave a magic wand. How many nurses do we need?
Oh, we will take as many as we can get, I think, right now.
I don't pay any attention. I hate competitions. I hate award ceremonies because I think they're just completely, redundant, really. What I think might be a great piece of music, you might not.
Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen. And I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National, which starts after the news at 7 with an interview with Diana Noonan, who has won this year's Margaret Mahi Medal for her services to books, or at least writing books for young children, young adults and children. She's written over